Hey guys, Brett here, and in this week number 3, we are going to start looking to hire a freelance software developer to create our software product for us. Now, before we jump into it, I do want to cover a couple of terms that you're probably going to hear when posting bids, when you're on the freelance sites, and when you're talking to the developers. These are not scary terms. They're just terms that I want you to understand what they are, at least a little bit, so that way you don't get concerned when you start hearing them later. Okay, so you're going to start hearing words like PHP, Ajax, ASP, .NET, JavaScript, SQL, MySQL, Framework, and jQuery. Now, these are words that describe programming languages, programming libraries, databases, and a framework is just a pre-done frame for coders to code with. These are things that you don't honestly have to worry about too much. You may hear coders say these types of things. You may see them in their biographies or in their work histories, but you don't have to be concerned. When you see these words, all you have to worry about is that it's geek speak. As a matter of fact, you could just say to yourself, okay, that's computer nerd stuff. He knows what they are. Good for him. I'm not too worried about it. Now, there is a specific combination of these things that you're going to be interested in as a general rule, and I'll get to that later. But I want everybody to understand that when they see these things, words like PHP and ASP and .NET and JavaScript and SQL and jQuery, you don't have to be concerned what they are. You don't have to know what they are. All you have to know is that those are things that coders use to make code. Now, there are some other terms that you are going to hear that you will be interested in. You're going to see things like full stack, front-end developer, back-end developer, and UI or UI developer. Now, the thing to understand is that when a software is developed, it's actually developed in two general layers. So the first layer is the front end, and that's what the user sees. That's also called the user interface. And then there's the logic code, the database code, the things that makes the interface actually work. That's the back-end developer. So generally, you'll have two developers in a large project, a front-end developer and a back-end developer. Now, we're not actually creating large projects. When it comes to software, most of the software in the IM or the Make Money Online niche doesn't even come close to being considered a large project from a programmer's perspective. So what you're going to look for is what's called a full stack developer. And a full stack developer is someone that can code both the front end and the back end. Fortunately for you, most of the coders that you see on the freelance sites are going to be full stack developers because they understand that people don't want to hire two different sets of people to get one project done. Now, the next thing you're going to see is pretty important. It's the word scope. And along with that word is the word scope creep. Scope is everything that encompasses the project. So when you give a project description to a freelancer, that project description is the scope. Anything that is not inside of that project description, anything that wasn't agreed on and described before he placed his bid is outside of the scope. And the reason you need to understand that is because sometimes people think that extra things that are obvious aren't actually obvious. So the freelancer is going to bid on the scope, on the description as you gave it. If you want extra work outside of that scope, if it's going to be time consuming, the freelancer is likely going to want additional payment for that extra work. That extra work is what's called scope creep. Now, not all scope creep will necessitate extra payment. If he's doing a project and you say, hey, can you do this one little thing, then that's fine. But generally speaking, if you want more work that's outside of the original scope of the project, you're going to have to provide more payment. You're also going to see the word library. Now, the reason I want to point this word out is because libraries, from a coder's perspective, are pre-written code that they use when they create a project. So think of it like the templates or the tools. When you're writing code, it's very time consuming to write the same code over and over and over again from scratch, especially since different projects need similar things in them. So, for example, if you are writing code to clean an input and make sure there's no bad characters in the input. It doesn't make sense to write that code over and over and over every single time, every time you have a project. So coders write libraries, pre-written functions that they use in their projects. Now, the reason this is something you need to be concerned about is because a coder might ask you if he can use a library or his libraries in your project. And you need to ask yourself if you're okay with that, because all of your code won't be 100% original. Now, before you say to yourself, okay, well, I don't want them to do that, understand that by allowing them to use their libraries, it's going to make your project a lot smaller, and it's also going to make it a lot more cost effective for you. Also understand that it is very standard for coders to use libraries. Myself, personally, as a software developer, I have libraries of hundreds of functions that I use when I code. I would not want to write them over again. It's very, very standard for coders to use libraries. So if somebody asks you if they can use their libraries or if they can use open source libraries, because coders share libraries with each other, you generally want to say yes, because that's going to get you a smaller, more cost-effective project, because the coder can create it faster for you. That also comes into the term open source. If he wants to use an open source library, which is a library that a different coder wrote that he's sharing with the world for free, generally speaking, that should be fine as well. Now, if you really insist that he writes everything from scratch, that's okay if that's what you want. Just understand that it's going to cost more. The last two terms that I want to talk about is the word LAMP, and that's not something that lights up your room, and the word SaaS. Now, SaaS stands for Software as a Service. This is cloud-based software. And incidentally, cloud-based software is not something that I suggest you create, at least for your first couple of projects. The word LAMP stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. You're going to hear people say that they are LAMP developers. And if they're LAMP developers, the only thing you need to know about that is that LAMP developers can code code that runs on the vast majority of web servers. Most web servers are Apache, and they run the PHP programming language, and they use the MySQL database. So that is exactly what LAMP is. Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. So if you see a coder that says he's a LAMP developer, that's somebody that you're going to be able to work with. When hiring developers online, you're generally looking for a full stack LAMP developer. That is a developer who can code the user interface, the front end, as well as the database and logic code, the back end, in the PHP language, using MySQL for the database, with the software intending to run on Apache server. And again, the good news is this is the most common type of developer you're going to find on the freelance sites. And the good news is that you don't really need to know what any of that means. You just need to understand that this is the most common type of developer that's going to create software that's going to run on the most common type of web server. Now, you might have caught on from the things that I've been saying so far that we are going to be developing web-based software. This is software that runs on a web server that runs in the user's browser. This is not software that people download and run on their own computer. Downloaded software is a massive pain to support and should be avoided. And the reason it's a massive pain to support is because people download the software, they put it on their computer. You don't know what kind of computer they're running. You don't know if it's updated. You don't know if they're running an outdated version of Windows. You don't know what else they have on their computer. You don't know what kind of bugs or viruses are on their computer. You have no control over the environment because the environment is their computer and you don't even know what that environment is. Downloaded software is extremely difficult to create and support for a person just getting started. For this reason, we are going to go with the only two real viable options: cloud-based software, which is SaaS, Software as a Service, or WordPress plugins. Both of those things have advantages and disadvantages, and I'm going to go over each one of them right now. So first, let's take a look at cloud-based software. Now, cloud-based software is software that runs on your web server. and the customer or the user will log into your web server into a members area in order to access and use the cloud-based software. If you've used any of my products, you've probably seen several of my products are cloud-based software. Now, there are pros and cons to cloud-based software, and I'm going to go through them. So the first thing is that there's nothing to install. Customers like that there's nothing to install, that there's nothing for them to fiddle with, that they can just use it right away. You may have actually seen this on people's sales pages where they say nothing to download or install. That's something customers definitely like. It does not require the user to have a WordPress site. So if you're going to create a WordPress plugin, obviously the people buying it have to have WordPress and have to have a website. With a cloud-based software, they don't need to have WordPress or a WordPress site because they're logging into your server and using everything on your system. Cloud-based software is also easy to update. Since everybody is logging into your server, if a bug is found or you want to do a change, all you have to do is change your server, and all of a sudden, all of the customers have the new version. Now, there are some downsides to cloud-based software. It requires you to have a decent web server. And when I say a decent web server, I don't mean some $9.99 shared hosting package. You're going to need a virtual private server at least, and probably a dedicated server. You're going to have to pay the ongoing costs for that server. And you're going to have the technical ability to manage that server yourself. Cloud-based software is more difficult to support. And the reason it's more of a problem is because, frankly, people are stupid. And I'm not saying that the customers are stupid. I just mean people in general are stupid. People forget the URL of the site, of the software. People forget their passwords. People forget their login emails. And guess who they come to when they have those problems? They come to you, and then you have to go ahead and support them. You have to find their password. You have to change it. You have to find their login email. You have to give them the information that they should have remembered, but they didn't remember because people in general just aren't that smart. And again, I'm not picking on the customers. I just mean people in general. Honestly, all of us just aren't that smart. Because of all of these things with logins and passwords and stuff, cloud-based software can be more difficult to support. Also, because you're storing logins and passwords and because everything is one central place, there is a greater possibility for security issues. You can become a target for hackers to try to hack your site. Also, cloud-based software is more costly to get developed. Because when you're creating a cloud-based software, you have to create the login system. You have to create the database from scratch. You have to create the password recovery functions. You have to do all of that stuff. Things that you wouldn't have to do with WordPress because WordPress provides all of that for a developer who's creating a WordPress plugin. Okay, now let's look at the WordPress pros and cons. Now, WordPress is less costly to get developed, and that's just because there's less code that developer needs to write. He doesn't have to write a login system and a password recovery system, and he doesn't have to secure logins and encrypt passwords. Because all those things are handled by WordPress, because you log into WordPress to use a plugin, the developer can save time. He doesn't have to write as much code, so generally a WordPress plugin is going to be less costly to get developed. It's also going to be less difficult to support because you don't have those problems of people forgetting the website URL, of people forgetting their password, of people forgetting their login email. Of course, if it's a WordPress plugin, it's not a cloud-based software, so you don't have to have your own web server. So you don't have to run and manage a web server. Also, there's less possible security issues. While WordPress plugins can introduce security issues to WordPress if they're poorly developed, WordPress itself is a pretty secure system, so there's less possible security issues with WordPress plugins. Now, there are some cons. Obviously, if you're creating a WordPress plugin, the customer and the end user has to have a WordPress site in order to use your plugin. And as I said, WordPress plugins can be more difficult to do updates because unlike a cloud-based system, you can't just change the central system and everybody gets the new version. Now, I'm going to help you. You're probably wondering, well, there's pros and cons of both. Which one should I do? Should I create a cloud-based software? Should I create a WordPress plugin? Well, I'm going to help you out. If you have technical ability, if you are very, notice I have very in bold and it's underlined, not just I kind of know my way around. If you are very familiar with things like cPanel, MySQL, PHPMyAdmin, WHM, managing a server and doing updates, then you might, not definitely, but you might want to consider a cloud-based software. If things like cPanel and MySQL and PHPMyAdmin and WHM make your head spin, or you don't feel extremely competent with all of those things, then I strongly suggest you create a WordPress plugin. A WordPress plugin is going to be less costly, and WordPress is widespread enough that you're still going to have a huge audience of people to sell your plugin to. All right, so where are you going to find your coder? Now, there are a number of freelance sites, but I want to list a couple that I'm aware of and a couple that I think you should probably stay away from. So freelancer.com is a pretty good freelance site. Odesk.com is a freelance site, and Guru.com is a freelance site. All three of those websites are sites where you can hire freelance computer programmers. You can also, believe it or not, hire freelance programmers from Fiverr. There are people on Fiverr that will create WordPress plugins for you, and they do it incredibly cheaply. However, these are not the quality of people that you want to hire. Stay away from Fiverr. Go with one of the three freelancer sites that I have listed above. There's also another freelance site called TopTal. Now, TopTal is a site that has freelancers, but they're freelancers that are used to working with large companies. You don't want to hire TopTal because the TopTal programmers are quite expensive because they're used to working on a corporate level. So stay away from TopTal, stay away from Fiverr, look at freelancer.com, Odesk, and Guru.com. Okay, to finish up this video, before we head into the next one, I just want to give you some quick tips about hiring a developer. First of all, you need to understand that the developer cannot read your mind. I'm going to say that multiple times in the training this week because I cannot stress how important it is that you give the developer as much information about your project as possible. He knows absolutely nothing about what you want created unless you tell it to him. And I've been a freelance developer for years. I made my full-time living as a freelance developer. And I can tell you for sure, 100% of the time, out of the hundreds of projects that I've done, there has never been a person who gave me too much information and that was too clear. That I said, oh man, I really wish you wouldn't have been so detailed on what you wanted. But there's been dozens and dozens of times where I said to people, look, you're not even making me understand what you need, and canceled the project or didn't want to do it, or it took longer than it should have and cost them more than it should have. You cannot give too much information when you're hiring a developer. You cannot be too detailed or too specific as towards your requirements. Now, related is beyond explaining your software in detail, you also need to be clear and upfront about any expectations. Now, these are expectations such as the time frame. If you need your project done in a specific time frame or you want it done in a specific time frame, you need to be very clear to the freelancer. You need to say, I need it done by this date, or I need it done within 10 days of bid acceptance. You need to be very clear and very upfront as towards the time frame. You also need to be clear about testing. So once he says the project is done, who's going to test? Are you going to test? Is he going to test? How much time are you going to need for testing? You need to tell the freelancer up front that you are going to need to test it extensively before you release the funds to him. You also need to be clear on any communication expectations. So for example, if you expect an answer within 24 hours, if you send him a message for, say, example, a status update, you need to tell him ahead of time and say, look, just so you know, before we start the project, I'm going to expect any questions or messages that I send you to be answered within 24 hours. Be upfront with all of your expectations so that way there's no surprises later on. Finally, if it's possible, pay a flat fee and set your budget before posting your job. Now that's important. A lot of times people, they don't understand how much a project is going to cost. But you don't need to understand how much a project is going to cost. What you need to understand is how much you're willing to pay. Set your budget before posting your job. Decide what creating this product is worth to you. Now, you don't need to know like what a proper budget is. You just need to know what it's worth to you. If you have $500 to spend and that's what you can put into creating a product, well, then set that as your budget. The one thing you don't want to do is let the developer advise you on what the project should cost. You should have a clear understanding of what you're willing to spend before you even post your job. Now, you might go ahead and post your job at what you're willing to spend and find out that it was a little bit low, and that unfortunately there are just no good freelancers willing to do your project at that price. And if that happens, then you have to rethink either your budget or the project requirements. Or you might post the job and find out that what you're willing to spend was actually quite high, and there's freelancers that are willing to do it at less of a price. That's fine. But either way, set a budget in your mind and say, this is what the product is worth to me before you even post your job.